Okay, why are we doing this meeting? And it's, in some senses, the CSC's work on air pollution, as you know, goes back almost now 20 years?
Exactly 20 years.
20 years. In fact, this year we will have the anniversary of our slow murder report in November. The first public meeting that we did in Delhi on air pollution was in 1996. We actually took Vigyan Bhavan at that time to do this meeting. And the release of the report was at the then Vice President, Mr. K.R. Narayan's house. It was a report called Slow Murder because that was the first time that we were really realizing that air pollution was something that was actually killing us softly, slowly. It was also the time when the world was recognizing the dangers of toxic pollution, particularly emissions that were coming out of diesel vehicles. We were beginning at that stage. They were the first reports to even talk about PM 2.5. And I say this because in some senses, when you look back at your work and you look back at the recent history of what we've all done, it seems so amazing that you were at a stage when the world was contesting the knowledge at that time of PM 2.5. And I know for Kirk this is not new because when Kirk visited us in the 80s, he was the first person who was holding a handheld monitor to look at smoke coming out of biomass stoves. And everybody looked at him and said, really, is that even an issue? And that was very much what we went through in the mid-90s when we raised the issue of PM 2.5. The first big challenge to us came from the automobile manufacturers at that stage, as it continues to do even today. When in the Supreme Court, they challenged the very knowledge and the science behind PM 2.5. And there are some very interesting, for any one of you who are interested in history, there's some very interesting statements that were made at that stage by the automobile manufacturers, really talking about how, that there was nothing called particulates. That, it was a completely wrong assumption to believe that something called particulates could actually hurt human bodies. That this science was voodoo science, and that it just did not happen. That there was, at most, there was some pollution that came out of cars, but then they were at Euro 0 by then, but they said still their cars were clean. I think we've come a long way since then. And I'm not going to get into the history of what happened. I want to talk about the future. And I think that's what this conference is distinctly about. This conference is not about the problem of air pollution. We have gone beyond that stage. For the first time that we are actually saying we recognize the problem of air pollution, we recognize that it's high toxicity and it damages our bodies. We recognize the fact that even if data and epidemiological studies from our part of the world may be weak, may be missing, but still we recognize the fact that our bodies are no different from the bodies of anyone who lives in the US or in Europe, and that these are tiny killers. I think that part of the discussion is now behind us. I see this also because in the hearing when Anumita and I were there, a week ago, 10 days ago, in the Supreme Court, when the Supreme Court has put, as you know, a ban on the registration of 2000 cc and above diesel cars in the entire region surrounding Delhi. So not just in Delhi, but in the entire region. And the Supreme Court has said very clearly that this ban is temporary because that's not what we had asked for. We had asked for a compensation tax to be paid by the diesel vehicles so that we can equalize the difference between petrol and diesel. Because in India, and I'm not sure in other parts of the world, but in India, the price of diesel is kept lower in the assumption that it is used for public transport, it is used for railways. Even today, when it is completely decontrolled, there is less taxation on diesel as compared to petrol. And as a result, the price differential remains, even though the difference is coming down, but it remains. And because the operating costs are lower of diesel, what happens is that even the richest Mercedes-Benz and their very, very, very expensive lawyer was in court that day, who argued with the Chief Justice that their car emissions were cleaner than the air outside. Now, given that, what the court said that day was very, very interesting. Both Anumita and I had gone absolutely tense and armed, as you can imagine, with information. We were facing the battery of top legal luminaries of India. In the last hearing, we had got 4 former ministers of the last government on the side of the automobile manufacturers. So you can imagine the size of the stake here and the importance to this hearing. But what I found very interesting that the Chief Justice said, he said, listen, we are beyond listening to the fact that diesel is not polluting. That's not even on the table anymore. We have crossed that bridge. We have accepted the fact that air pollution is very high. We've also accepted the fact that diesel is polluting. The question that we have today, and that is the only question on which we would like a discussion, is what is the measure and the size of the tax that you would require, which will equalize the difference between petrol and diesel and provide no incentive for diesel to ply. Now, people may still buy a diesel car because they love diesel, but the fact is that most parts of the world where the price has been equalized and emission standards have been equalized, the market for diesel has actually disappeared. Now, I'm repeating this because to me this signals where we are today. We are no longer contesting the fact about diesel. We are no longer contesting the fact that pollution is something that is really bad for our bodies. Air pollution is really bad for our bodies, and we need to take action. It's the same thing when it comes to the Delhi government. It's the same thing that comes to the union government. Over the past year, the central government has done 2 things that are very, very important and I think are game changers in the future. One, we have introduced Euro 6 standards, which will come in from 2020 onwards. Now, as you know, the last government, when they left, the report of the last government's report was that they would come almost 8 years later. In fact, the time frame was not even decided for Euro 6. The automobile manufacturers have been saying that over our dead body, can you bring it over by 2020? 2024 is the fastest and the earliest that we can bring in clean fuel standards, emission standards. But the central government has taken a fairly large, dramatic move to say, no, health of a large number of people are at stake. We will ramp up our refinery capacity and we will move. Now, because the fuel ministry has moved, the automobile manufacturers have to move. And I think that's part of the big change that I have seen over this past year in India. The other big thing that the central government has done is to say that they will make CNG available across NCR. So not just in Delhi, but across NCR. And there is now almost 100 new stations being opened up across the, for people from outside, we have Delhi, but then we have the greater Delhi region, which is called the National Capital Region, which is a large part of where now people live and work. And so anything you do in Delhi, the airshed is the same. So we need to be able to extend it. So compressed natural gas will be made available to across this region, which is another big thing. The Delhi government also has made it clear that fighting air pollution is a top priority for them. They have taken certain measures. They have promised to do a lot more. So the question that we have in front of us here is not to talk about the fact that pollution is a problem, but talk about the agenda of what needs to be done. So we have actually structured this conference very deliberately to look at what cities are doing, what cities are trying to do which have had success, what cities want to do more of, what cities want to do less of. And my colleagues, Anumita's entire team has been traveling across India, looking at different Indian cities, because our other concern is that we are very Delhi-centric. We live in Delhi, we breathe this air, and as they say always, where you live, where you work, you have a responsibility also to make sure that your work has an impact. I mean, I can tell you that the two of us, as well as Anumita's colleagues, and this is wrong, there's no reason, we're only an NGO, but we feel if the pollution challenge in Delhi is not won, then we have failed. Because we feel in some senses we live here, we are an environmental group, we are demanding change. If we cannot make impact in our own city, then how can I go to Pune and tell Sujit, we need to do this in Pune, or we need to do something else in Ahmedabad? We need to make a difference where we are. And that's something very clear in our minds and something that we work very hard to do. But it doesn't mean that we don't recognize the fact that it is time that CSC actually built a larger alliance of cities across India, because this is not a Delhi-centric problem. It is an India problem. We need to learn from those cities, we need to understand what they are doing, and we need to share our knowledge to suggest a roadmap for the future. And that's really where we have got the second session that will come. And lastly, why then, what are we really looking for from this workshop? What we are looking for is to learn the different pathways to air pollution control. We believe there is no pathway which is the ultimate, the best, and the only. There is no one truth in this case. There is no one road that we need to traverse. And we're saying this out of experience, because when Anumita and we began our journey in 1996, we had only the experience of America, and we had only the experience of Europe to look at in terms of what they did for pollution control. And so you went incrementally from Euro 1, Euro 2, Euro 3, Euro 4, Euro 5. Europe went from Euro 1, and US went from tire. And we basically said, control the tailpipe emissions, and we will manage to find a way to cleaner air. Okay? But today, I think, given the rich experience that we have from other parts of the world, what is emerging is that European American way of dealing with air pollution is clearly not working for them, but it's also not working for the entire world, because if it was, we wouldn't have climate change to deal with. Because it is transport-related emissions which are also a big contributor to climate change. And we are also learning that as they have cleaned up, they have found new sources of pollutants, and so they are constantly behind the struggle of cleaning up. So, given that, I think what we are in the first time, perhaps, is in a conversation. This is not, I did it, so you better do it. That's Obama speak for climate change, okay? But it is not our speak for air pollution, because it is a speak where we need to accept we are all in the same boat together. This is our experience. This is your experience. Let's learn from different cities and see what can we actually chart as the way ahead. And that's really with the purpose with which we have put together this conference. We have people from across this country. We have people from across the region. Region meaning our part, countries where we are in the same trajectory of growth. Some ahead of us, some behind us, but nevertheless, we're all in it together, as I said. And I think that's really where this conference has been structured to do. So I'm saying this because I really want this to be an issue in which tomorrow afternoon when we re-meet and we talk about the real purpose of this conclave, which is the city conclave and civil society action, I think that's where the learning from all this needs to be brought together for tomorrow afternoon. So our entire purpose is to learn, to figure out, if it's worked there, can it work in my part of the world or not? But in this, we're all together. The first session is, and I will ask Kirk, who is a very old friend, to come and speak. The reason we wanted this session to begin the conference is because the science is also shifting. And we need to keep shifting and learning from new science. And we have for long measured ambient air quality, which is important, and we must continue to do so. But ambient air quality does not often reflect what I am exposed to. What is the difference in, what is the exposure at my level? It's a quibble I've had, Kirk, for almost 10 years now, and I'm looking forward to hearing you for that reason, because I'll tell you, every time I've gone to ambient air quality monitoring stations, I've looked at the height and I've said, I don't breathe there. I breathe here. And I'm short, so I breathe at particularly ground level, okay? And it's been an issue that has always bothered me, that are we monitoring the right strata of the air? Is this where the mixing takes place? Is the mixing taking place here? What is it? And I'm very excited when Anumita told me that this science is changing. It's asking questions. And I think that is what we are trying to do. We should learn. What is this new science telling us? Is there a different way of measurement? Should we be looking at different forms of monitoring? What is the best kind of monitoring which is best for our kind of cities? And I want you to keep this session in mind when we come back tomorrow morning at 9:30 in the morning, because the other thing that has been bothering us a lot is these air pollution monitoring stations are very expensive to set up and even more expensive to run, plus they have very high levels of skill that is required, which is why for people in Delhi, and I will break into one word of Hindi just so that it's all tu mein. Okay? It's all tu mein. Tumhara data sahi hai, mera data sahi hai. Okay? And the reason is because these stations are difficult and we don't have the right systems. Also, we know that we have 17 stations in Delhi, but we have none in Gurgaon, we have none in Ghaziabad, we have nothing in Noida. We have one in Pune, we have one in Mumbai. I mean, what is it that can we really monitor the scale of air pollution at this level? Is there a new learning? Are there countries doing things differently in terms of monitoring as well? Should we learn from them? What can we learn from them? Obviously, you want regulatory integrity of the data, but you also want information which is quick, available. Can we lose the big picture by putting in sensors where the data is wrong and people then look at it and say, oh, but that data is unreliable? And that's also happened in India, because you have opened up this thing and there are so many people now sitting and monitoring, and that data is being confused with regulatory data. And as a result of it, what you're getting is even more tu mein. In English, it means, how would you translate tu mein? Cockfight. Yeah, cockfight, a cockfight. Okay, it just means everyone is fighting with each other. It's more than it's less than a cockfight, it basically is. It's a nice Hindi word. Can't be translated. So I think that's really where we are in this conference, and I've overextended my intro, but as I do always. But I hope that's given you a good sense of where we are. Kirk, can I now invite you to come up?